I was completely smitten with her. Just don't tell her, I responded, smiling warmly. Does she know what you did? Amber asked as David closed the trunk's lid. Yes, I replied as I proceeded along the side of the car to the driver's door. Have you ever done it before? My gaze was drawn to my daughter, who was about to say the witch's name. I tried everything to make that woman happy, however, that wasn't enough to keep her from giving what she shouldn't to every man she could, I said in a heated tone. Sorry, Dad, it's just, never mind, forget I ever mentioned it, Amber replied, shaking her head. Let's chalk it up to a mental fart. I promised myself not to bring up the past. I'm sorry I couldn't keep it, I said. That's fine, Amber, just don't bring it up again. I stopped myself from calling her mother a witch, which she was. I promise I won't. I noticed she believed what she said. So, get in, I would rather not miss breakfast, I said, which was correct. I told you Catalina could cook, and I've never missed one of her meals. Dad, didn't you get a home? Amber inquired as we drew into the parking garage of my condominium complex. Been there, done that. I don't have a lawn to mow or any responsibilities to keep up with here, I said, opening the trunk after shutting off the car. Furthermore, it's close to work, and I'm not planning to buy a home in this city. I pretended to be shocked as I said, the taxes are outrageous, so David, you too are looking to buy? When the young man slammed his head against the underside of the trunk lid, I smirked wickedly. You're not going to tell me that you two are living together out of wedlock? I asked. I pretended to be a stuck-up prude, but I wasn't. I merely found it entertaining to tease my future son-in-law. What father hasn't done it to his daughter's future husband? Dad, Amber bit my lip as the tone I hadn't heard in 7 years left Amber's lips. She used the same tone when I treated the losers she dated as a teenager. However, I cannot argue that David was a loser. A father must guarantee that the man is suitable for his daughter. Don't, David, he's a good dude. Amber had a serious expression on her face as she crossed her arms. It reminded me of the witch when she was enraged. I couldn't help myself. That's okay, honey, your father is merely assessing me. I'd do the same, David remarked, nodding at me. The boy is intelligent, perhaps there is hope for him. I am used to myself. If any of you needs to exercise while here, there is a gym on the ground floor. Not difficult to find. If anyone gives you trouble, simply inform them that you have guests from 103, I said as I led them into the building. They nodded and understood. I was not going to say anything, but you look great, Dad. I don't recall seeing you so slim, Amber observed as we walked towards the elevator. Well, I had 2 children to raise, and going to the gym came in a distant second to making sure you and your brother had everything they needed, I answered by pushing the call button. May I ask, Mr. Comey Tony, I interrupted, may I ask Tony, when you married your new wife, did you research the dominant culture? Did I say something wrong? I saw David stare at my daughter as I scowled. I'm going to say it once, so take this as a caution. Do not, I repeat, don't call them that. They loathe that word. It's analogous to calling a black guy or woman the N-word. It is either Latino or Latina, there's nothing else, understood? I stated strongly that I meant no offense. I know, but it's better that I tell you this now than you say it in front of Catalina or her family. You wouldn't get out alive. That word offends them greatly. They believe the white man is attempting to eliminate their culture because individuals today want to impose their beliefs on a group of people who understand who they are, I remarked, mimicking Catalina's outburst to her cousin while we were dating because a couple of people kept calling her that at work. Could they not tell she loathed that word? Some folks are simply fools, I suppose. I understand. No wonder Pablo always gives me the stink look, David whispered behind me as I got into the elevator. Catalina and Alandra can understand and speak English. If the two of you do not speak Spanish, do not try, I said. I saw nods in the elevator door's reflection as I punched the floor button for my condo. The instant I stepped into the home I shared with Catalina, my smile lightened up as I saw my wife and daughter still in their PJs, waiting for me to return with my traditional kiss and Alandra's grip around my legs. I took a step back to allow the two people who had been the most important individuals in my life for the past 5 years to look at my adult daughter and her fiancé, Amber David. "I'd like you to officially meet my wife, Catalina," I said, squeezing her into me and gesturing towards my daughter, "and my daughter, your sister, Alandra," I remarked, watching my eldest daughter lower down to her knees and extend her arms to Alandra. "Hello, baby sister. I'm really glad to see you," my daughter whispered as she clutched and gently rocked Alandra. "Hello, Mrs. Howell," David said, extending his hand to Catalina. "Catalina, please. A family should not rely on formality," Catalina said. I noticed David was taken aback when Catalina hugged him. "Why don't you show them to their room, and I'll make the omelets?" "I hope you are both hungry because you will not be after breakfast," I remarked, bringing the two of them to our guest bedroom, Alandra racing ahead of me. "What are you doing now, you little goof?" I inquired in a playful tone as Alandra danced in front of the audience. "Nothing," Alandra responded with her signature toothy smile. "When you're finished unpacking, there's coffee in the kitchen if you want some," I said, standing in the doorway with Alandra alongside me and holding my hand. "We will. We skipped breakfast to reach our flight on time," Amber explained, placing her suitcase on the bed. "Good, because Catalina enjoys preparing enormous dinners. Reminds her of her childhood. We'll let you two get situated. Come on, honey, let's give them some solitude," I spoke softly, touching Alandra's hand. "See, Poppy," Alandra said, looking up at me. "He appears pleasant," Catalina stated casually as I walked into the kitchen, and Alandra went to observe her My Little Pony. "He is a very polite fellow," I said as I gathered mugs for all of us. "It smells great in here," Amber murmured from behind us. "I'd have guessed they'd unpacked. Couldn't wait for the coffee," she murmured as if she could read my mind. Catalina expressed gratitude and satisfaction in her culinary abilities as I placed a fresh cup in front of her. I noticed her eyes light up. "Creamer is in the fridge, or there is milk, and here's the sugar," I began, pushing the small dish that Catalina keeps it in for guests in case they do enjoy a good cup of coffee. "Thank you, Dad. This is exactly what the doctor prescribed," Amber moaned as she smelled the scent of coffee. I noticed how she mouthed a thank you to Catalina, who nodded back as she laid the creamer down before my daughter, who spent no time getting her coffee exactly how she liked it. Amber groaned into her cup. "Thank you, my cousin runs a coffee estate in the mountains of Mexico. He sends us a few bags each month, knowing how much your father loves coffee, as do I." "But my cousin really likes your father," Catalina gave me a knowing smirk. "It was not that the man liked me okay, he did, but that's only because I saved his business from failure when a disease devastated his harvest 2 years ago. Hey, I didn't complain. I am a silent owner of a coffee farm, and I receive free coffee, so I consider that a win-win situation," I said. "Does he?" Amber gave me a peek. "Yes, your father is a very nice man," Catalina added, giving me a cheeky look as she rolled the omelet up after covering the middle with caramelized onions and roasted peppers. She removed the seeds to reduce the heat and the roasted tomatoes before plating it, watching her make a much smaller one for Alandra. We both knew Alandra wouldn't finish it if given a full-sized one. I couldn't help it, my gaze shifted away as Catalina bent down, allowing her pajama bottoms to tighten around her bum as she removed the terrible signs from the oven. What shall I say? I enjoy ogling my wife's figure. That, I believe, explains why she behaves in such ways, I thought as my eyes snapped up as David walked down the hall. I believe he took over unpacking so Amber could converse with us over coffee. "Now, Net, make yourself useful by carrying these to the table," Catalina teased me as she held out 2 platters, Alandra coming to the table. I spoke in a fatherly tone, seeing my daughter transfixed to the television. "See, Poppy," Alandra said, sliding off the couch and hurrying over to where she normally sat. "Gracious, Poppy," she replied, looking up at me with that lovely smile when I set chocolate milk in front of her. You're welcome, honey, I mumbled into her hair and kissed the top of her head. I noticed how Alandra nodded vehemently when Amber asked if she may sit next to her. This is very good, Amber groaned from behind her cupped hands. I hope it's not too hot for you. Your father dislikes excessive heat, Catalina spoke in a motherly tone as she looked across the table at my eldest daughter. No, moving her head gives it a little extra kick, Amber stated politely. I would not mind a little, thank you, David replied with a smile. Catalina presented him with a bottle of Luca Taco Label Reserve Chili Habanero hot sauce that she had bought from Mexico. It's hot, so use sparingly. I was raised with it, therefore I am used to it, thank you, David remarked, while removing the bottle from her. I observed David taste-tested on a small portion of his omelet. You okay? Catalina inquired, massaging David's back as I saw the heat get to him. Never better. What is it named again? I assumed he was angry as he added extra to his omelet. Could Taco Black Label Reserve Chili and Habanero hot sauce, Catalina stated matter-of-factly. I ordered it from Mexico. It isn't the hottest sauce out there, but it's certainly spicy. Do you like it? Yeah, David said. Better than Tabasco sauce, with a knot? Good. Then you'll love our family get-together. They bring their own, Catalina spoke with a fairly pleasant smile on her lips. We're heading to Asheville tomorrow. Would you like to go to the zoo together? I inquired, noticing Alandra getting thrilled in her seat at the thought. Only if we won't bother you three, Amber said, looking around the table at us. Amber dabbed her lips. You are not an inconvenience to us or your family, so don't think that, Catalina urged in her motherly voice. As I previously stated, she comes from a huge family, and I knew she would be uncomfortable with just the three of us in the house. Don't get me wrong, she adored us, but I knew she wanted more. All week I could see how happy she was to have a full house. So, how did you two meet? Catalina questioned, sliding her legs beneath her as she sipped her morning coffee from her chair on our terrace. David was already working at the shop when I was appointed as the pharmacy's assistant manager, Amber explained, sitting across from us at the little round table we had set up for such occasions while Alandra watched cartoons. You worked your way up the ladder, I said. David nodded. I respect that of a man. What are your future plans? I believe that in a few years, after I have gained more experience, I will try for a more corporate position in the company, David remarked, nodding in agreement with my idea. Do they have a program to help you prepare for such a position? Catalina inquired, sliding her hand into my lap and squeezing my thigh. Yes, they do, but I want to be sure they won't turn me down. That's why I'm going to wait a few more years, David explained before taking a sip of his coffee. That sounds reasonable, I agreed, knowing that if he was a manager in my bank's region, I too would hunt for someone with more branch management experience before considering elevating them to the corporate ladder. So, tell me how you two met, Amber asked, her gaze flickering between Catalina, myself, and David. Catalina and I glanced at each other, our eyes met silently questioning who would tell that narrative. In the end, I believed Catalina's telling it would be funnier than me telling it. So, we have to go back to when your father first moved here. At the time, I was engaged to someone else, but he was unfaithful. David nodded in agreement as Catalina's fingers never left my thigh. Nonetheless, I always observed your father wandering about the premises with this sort of look. Someone pushed a pine cone up his keister, Amber giggled as Catalina spoke, and David chuckled lightly. I mean, he is a lovely man, but I am engaged and do not wander. I noticed Amber's head dropping at that. So, for the course of his 2 years here, that face never left him. So when I stepped into his office that day, I'd been single for a few months. I told your father to get whatever was up his bum out, and who knew, he was laughing. She taunted me as I deserved. I was in a hoe during those years. Then we developed a friendship. I knew he wanted more, but he remained patient. After 3 months, we had our first date, and things progressed from there, and I've never looked back. Catalina stated this with love in her eyes as she gazed at me. So, If you two weren't too exhausted, I figured we'd spend the day exploring the city, getting you acquainted with the layout, and then come back, and I'd cook us a lovely large dinner, Catalina said. I could tell she was eager to make them both feel welcome. Have you never been to the beach? I responded, observing the look in my daughter's eyes when she realized we had the week off. How about we go down to Roberto's place if he allows us to use it for a few days? I spoke, looking over at my wife, knowing the space was large enough to accommodate all of us. Are you sure, honey? They've arrived, and it's easier to go to the beach here than in Kansas City, I stated clearly. You know I'm fine with it. I know Alondre will be happy to go, but you'll have to speak with Roberto, Catalina stated while glancing at me. I understand, I nodded, seeing as that was my idea. Roberto was the type of man who treated you with more respect if the person who came up with the idea was the one to ask. Or that's what I've learned from the man over the years. I'll go make the call, I responded, rising from my seat. The noises of the city below us faded away as I pushed the glass sliding door shut. Are you enjoying the show, Munchkin? Landa is a hunter, walking out of Catalina's in my bedroom with my phone after it had charged. I kept my gaze fixed on the TV as the names of people I'd met and grown close to since moving to Charlotte flew by as I approached Roberto's contact information. Best wishes, Tony, Roberto's heavily accented voice crossed the line. Good morning, Roberto, I greeted. He didn't mind if I talked English instead of Spanish because he knew I could handle both. I was hoping you could do me a favor. When he shifted to English, the left corner of my lips raised. All of Catalina's family spoke English. They merely pretended they didn't notice when someone made a bomb out of themselves in front of their family. I saw it several times as a passing salesman attempted to peddle off his items without outright insulting their intelligence. But you understood exactly what the man was doing. It was always funny when the ladies joined in. The teenagers would then simply watch as the person scurried back to their car. Yeah, I was hoping you wouldn't mind if Catalina and I utilized your home for a Canadian hole, I said, seeing my daughter whip around in her seat and knowing exactly what that meant. I pretended I couldn't see the glee on her face when I said that. Of course you can, amigo. What is the unique occasion? He had a purpose for asking, given that we generally spent our vacations in the mountains, much cheaper on the money and fewer people around. We normally went to the beach when the entire family went down the Canadian hole. My eldest daughter traveled here with her fiancé, and she had never seen the ocean. I told the truth. The entire family was aware of our estrangement but understood why I moved away. There is no loss of desire with a sonogram until Proximo finishes the Somalice, I responded when he inquired whether I was bringing them over the next weekend. In the background, I heard my sister-in-law wonder what was making him so thrilled. That's when I heard her enthusiastic voice. He told her something I already knew. I heard her speak quickly in Spanish before her voice faded, knowing that in less than 10 minutes the entire family would know. Would you like me to bring the keys over? Nah, we'll pick them up while we tour the city, say about 1, I spoke, still ignoring my daughter's antics as she bounced on the couch. Ciro has a game today, so I'll leave them, I nodded as he told me about the hiding area. He generally had a spare house. Can you let Ciro know who I'll be supporting for? I expect 5 home runs, I heard my brother-in-law chuckle across the line. I knew Ciro had the potential to become a professional, he was just so good. I wish him the best of luck, I will. I hope she likes the beach, as do I said this before we stopped the call. Poppy, will we go to the beach? Alandra inquired with bated breath. Yes, we are, I said, pocketing my phone and smiling at my daughter's antics as she bounced on her knees. While I was thinking we'll go on Monday and enjoy the beach until Thursday. Is this acceptable with you, princess? Amused, I couldn't help but smile as Landry nodded vehemently. Now behave as you continue to enjoy the show. I whispered this before stepping back out onto the balcony, feeling Catalina's fingers on my back as I sank back into my seat. Hours later, we found ourselves cruising the streets of Charlotte. Alandra sat in the back seat between David and Amber, pointing out locations she liked to visit, particularly the Discovery. It was a little pricey, but it was worth it. It was a highly educational location, particularly for a 4-year-old stinking. When lunchtime arrived, we stopped at a renowned downtown sit-down restaurant where I saw my 2 children simply chat away. I saw that my wife had a fairly contented expression on her face as she watched my 2 children from across the table. David and I had a nice talk about his 401k. While I was a stock trader, I knew my way around them, so I gave him some advice on who and what I invested in with my own money. I noticed how attentively he was listening to every word. It indicated that he was scheming ahead of time, and I hoped the 2 of them did not end up like the witch and me. I have to admit that David was a charming chap. Just don't tell him what I said. I have to keep the father-in-law vibe going. However, I was pleased that Amber had found a partner who appeared to be a genuinely wonderful guy. After lunch, we went to Roberto's apartment. When we arrived at David and Amber's house and Rita's, I could see their perplexed expressions. I told them to wait in the car before immediately getting out and driving to the location Roberto had informed me about. He'd left his house keys at Canadian Hall. It did not take me long to find it. The keys jingled in my grasp, and warmth spread through my heart. I read Roberto and Catalina's sister's note, which they had left with them. I could speak Spanish but not read it, so they wrote in English. Their words impacted me deeply. Since I began seeing Catalina, her sister has sized me up and warned me not to injure her sister, or I would have to deal with her and Roberto. However, during the months of our whirlwind romance, I learned to like her and my brother-in-law. They were the first to help if Catalina became overwhelmed when caring for Alandra when she was first born. Not that I blame Catalina, having your first child is nerve-wracking. I know Catalina went to bed every now and then worrying about whether she would be a decent mother and so on. So, I mobilized the troops and escorted my wife away when those days came. She realized she was a very excellent mother. As darkness fell on Charlotte, my tiny family gathered in the living room to enjoy some family time watching a movie. Whatever you do is fine as long as you do it together. Amber and David were dozing off while I was doing laundry. I couldn't blame them. They had been up since the early hours of the morning to catch their flight. Catalina flashed me a glance that I mistook for "go to your father." I can't deny that I was watching her rear as she carried Alandra to her room. "Amber," I said softly, shaking her father. My memory went back to when she was a little kid and would mutter in that sleepy tone, "Let's get you 2 into bed," I said, noticing her eyes looking at me through the crack in her lids. "I'm sorry, I did." When David rose from his seat, I waved him off. "This happens, do not worry about it," I said carelessly. Amber wrapped her arm around me as soon as she stood up. Amber mumbled against my chest, "I have missed this for 7 years. Good night, Dad," she replied before kissing my left cheek and sliding her arm around David's waist. I was laying in bed waiting for Catalina to walk in, which she did after 15 minutes, which was rapid for Alandra. It told me Alandra was exhausted. When I watched my wife's sexy smile as she strolled down the bedside to our bathroom, I felt myself harden. Her eyes saw the movement of the blankets, which accentuated her sexy smile. I bit my lip at how delicious her smooth body felt after she crawled beneath the sheets. "Amor should not go to bed with a heart on, Catalina," she said to me in a wicked tone. "We had sex, and I slept like a baby afterwards, won't you?" But all too soon, strange how that is, at 5 a.m., our alarm went off. That meant I had to get some washing done so we could hit the road for the 3-hour trek to Asheville. Catalina was like a paparazzi, taking so many shots of me that day. I'm with Alandra, she's with her sister, Amber's with David, etc. I was pleasantly impressed. Amber and Catalina got along as they discussed their wedding preparations and venues. David was very attentive to Alandra, constantly accompanying her when she wanted to show him something she particularly enjoyed. As usual, I was the cautious father, as was David, which I enjoyed. You never know these days, and the globe has some ill people. We had lunch in the zoo, then we roamed the grounds before we were all exhausted and had sore legs by the end. I was carrying laundry on my shoulders, not that I minded. I realized quickly, way too soon, she would not need me as much. As sad as it was, that's life, nothing remains the same forever. Halfway home, I found Alandra dozing on Amber's lap. I noticed how Amber shot me the smile in the rearview mirror. "Honey, would you mind if we ordered in tonight?" Catalina asked tiredly. "No, you two ready for pizza?" I asked, gazing over at Amber and David. "I wouldn't mind a slice," David spoke, looking over at Amber, who shook her head. "Supreme, is everything all right with you?" I inquired, knowing Alandra would not eat anything else. Catalina enjoyed it as well. I do not, but I was usually overruled on the subject. "No, David is allergic to olives," Amber explained, placing her right palm on David's chest. "So, how about a tiny Supreme for them and a small meat lovers for us?" I responded with a smile. "That is something I can get behind," David nodded, eliciting an eye roll from Catalina. "You have the pizzas requested." "I'll get the washing ready for tomorrow," Catalina replied, flashing me her beautiful smile as she and Alandra strolled hand in hand to her bedroom. "Dad, you are aware that we exist. Do you know what would happen if I reneged on the beach after placing my order?" I questioned with a sharp look. "Are you trying to kill your father?" I was joking, but Alandra would throw a tantrum for weeks over it. "I really don't want you to go through too much bother for us." "That's fine," Amber added. "In addition, I promised you when you were younger that I would take you there, and I prefer to keep my word," I commented. Amber, like me, remembered that conversation when she was 10. "So, Tony, when were you going to go out?" David inquired, following me into the living room. "Say at 7 a.m. Roberto's house is a 6-hour trip away, a Canadian hole. Yes, that's the name of the beach," I stated, noting their bewildered expressions. "We will stay till Thursday so that you two can enjoy yourselves. It's a really beautiful sight, honey." "What time is it?" Catalina cried out to me from the laundry room. 7:20, I yelled back. "Is there anything going on?" Amber inquired, perplexed. "A football game is underway," I said, which was correct. A game did begin soon, given the late spring soccer season. I noticed David racking his head to see if there was a football game on. I clarified, noting how David wanted to smack his forehead for not realizing. "I didn't know you enjoyed soccer," Amber said, putting her legs beneath her and snuggling against David on the love seat. "I could take or leave it. Catalina and Alandra enjoy the games. I just get accustomed to them," I said offhandedly. Her family is huge supporters of the sport. They throw a big party for me when the World Cup is on, just as they do for the Super Bowl, because that's what family does, compromise with one another, I said, knowing we're about to get down to it. My gaze shifted to Catalina as she and Alandra stepped in, talking on her phone before moving to something I knew she only did in private. Alandra smiled as she hurried into the living room and got onto the sofa, settling into her position and waiting for the game to begin. She turned on the TV and switched the channel to ESPN3 for the game between Mexico and Brazil. Don't tell Catalina, but I was pulling for Brazil. She takes football soccer almost as seriously as Americans do football. When there was a knock at Catalina's condo door, I patted her leg. I knew it had to be the pizzas. Her attention was completely focused on the game as Mexico was leading during the first half of the first session. Personally, I found soccer dull, and I know she felt the same way about football. As good husband and wife, we set that aside and focused on the time we spent together before accepting the pizzas from the teenage kid. I pay him and leave a generous tip. Pizzas arrived. I yelled out to them as I brought them into the kitchen and prepared enough plates. Amber and David walked into the kitchen, but Alandra and Catalina remained glued to their chairs. I knew Alandra did this because she wanted to be like her mother. "Make yourself a dish," I gestured, bringing their plates to them. "Thank you, honey. Can you bring me some beer?" Catalina asked, kissing my cheek. "Sure, babe," I mocked. "My daughter about Kool-Aid for you. Are they not going to join us?" Amber asked. "Nah, not with Mexico in the lead. They won't leave that area," I stated. This was before I took a bite. God, I missed the meat lover's pizza. "This is good," David murmured as he inhaled his slice. I understand. Best pizza place in town, I stated, savoring the meaty toppings, knowing it would be a while before I had another meat lover's pizza. See, but there, La Pelota, Catalina yelled as she jumped from her seat, holding her plate in one hand and her beer in the other, with Alandra imitating her mother. No way. How can this be? Captain the ball, she lamented that one of Brazil's forwards nicked the ball before Mexico could score. Alandra, language, I chastised her for going a bit too far in mimicking for a 4-year-old, casting a glance at my wife. She averted her gaze in embarrassment, knowing she let her words lead her thinking far too often. While watching a game with our stomachs full of delicious pizza and a few beers, I took Alandra to bed at her usual time. I was surprised to see David get into the game near the conclusion. When we said our good nights, we separated for our respective rooms. Catalina was up at 5:30 the next morning, preparing breakfast for all of us. I knew she was excited about the prospect. I knew if Carson was present, she wouldn't know what to do. I wrapped my arms around her and kissed her neck as she flipped the pancakes on the flat skillet, feeling her lean back against me as we savored the solitude. What were your thoughts? I was not going. You must be insane to think I'd keep my hands to myself with my gorgeous wife in my arms, I answered, noticing Catalina blushing fiercely. You'd better not, I overheard her modest murmur. That did bring a grin to my face. Why shouldn't it, after all? I have a beautiful wife, a hyperactive daughter, and a grown daughter who is set to embark on her own journey into marriage. Life was good at that point. Wake up, Munchkin. Pancakes are almost ready, I said, waking my daughter from her sleep. We do not want to miss the beach, do we? I whispered, as Alandra rolled over to sleep again. Biting my lips, I gave her a gentle shake to shock her awake. I knocked on the guest bedroom door and opened it gently. We are awake. Just allow us a few minutes to get dressed, I could hear David's voice through the gap. Okay, just checking. Breakfast should be finished soon, I said before easing the door shut. Thank you, Dad, Amber stated as I offered her and David their morning coffee. Honey, get the orange juice out and place it on the table, Catalina instructed as she piled the last of the flapjacks on the stack she had constructed. Here, I instructed, setting the juice and a morning cup of chocolate milk on the table. I returned to help prepare the table and assist my wife in carrying the food. I couldn't stop smiling. Amber was in the kitchen helping Catalina, just as I was preparing to do with David's assistance. Dad, don't simply stand there gawking. Grab the plates, Amber teased as she carried the plate of flapjacks to the table, while David handled the 2 plates of sausage, one for breakfast, a spicier sausage combination. I spotted my wife smirk as she took the syrup from the cabinet. I obtained the plates for all of us. As I walked back to the table, I noticed how Catalina moved around it as if Amber and David were her own children, and how Amber responded to that. It made me worry about what actually occurred to my children when they were in their mother's care. As much as I didn't want to know anything about that woman, I supposed I'd have to bite my tongue to find out. Why were we out of the condo by 6:45? With the dishes done, the car was full, and we set out for the sandy sands of Canadian Hole. Mama. My head glanced over the trunk of my car as that word came from Amber, not Alandra. I noticed Catalina was a bit astonished by it, but her surprise rapidly converted to happiness, which filled her eyes. Would you show me around? I had no idea what Amber was so anxious about. Certainly, Catalina replied, extending her right arm to Amber. Do you mind unloading the car, boys? We can manage it, right? I inquired, gazing over at David, who nodded. Come, Alandra, let us show your sister the water, Catalina spoke in her pleasant, caring voice, with Alandra's happy cheerfulness permeating the air. Did anything happen between Amber and her mother? I stopped myself from saying what I usually call that woman. David was thinking about something as we emptied the bags, and I could see it in his eyes. I think Amber should inform you, I noticed how he looked down as I grabbed his left arm. Did that damage my little girl? I asked with a forceful tone. Emotional, nothing physical. At least, that's what she told me. Still does today. Not when I'm around, however. She knows I won't tolerate that in my home. I kicked her rear a few times after hearing that. I believe you will do well, I said, releasing my grip on his arm. I won't say anything to Amber about it. I showed him where he and Amber could stay on the other side of the house so they could have some privacy to do what engaged couples do without worrying about having Alandra here. With the bags in their correct rooms, the two of us headed out to join the girls. I promised you I'd get you here someday, didn't I? I talked from behind them as Catalina and Amber stood there, staring out at the white-capped waves, and Alandra went along the beach seeking for shells like she usually does. I wasn't expecting my daughter to wrap her arms around me like that. Thank you. It's quite gorgeous, her murmur was warm against my neck as I held her and softly caressed her back. You and I need to discuss later. It's just us, I whispered softly into her ear, feeling her nod against my shoulder as she slipped from my arms and into David's. Did you ever go to the beach? I questioned the man in my daughter's life. No, this is my first time as well. My parents were destitute, not that they didn't work, but they were impoverished. So something like that, David stated, but his gaze was not on me. No, they were out in the huge expanse of blue before us. I can understand that. Amber's childhood was fraught with financial constraints. I was like you, worked my way up while attending night school so that my family could have a better life, I said, feeling Catalina's fingers slip into mine as she approached my side. Amber took hold of my free hand as she had done so many times as a child. Later that night, after putting Alandra to bed, Catalina kept David amused. I led Amber out onto the back deck of Roberto's beach house. I knew I was going to despise what I was about to hear. What parent wants to hear that their child was abused? But I had to do it. I needed to know what she'd done to my children, okay, Amber? I know I told your brother I didn't want to hear about what occurred after I left, but I believe I need to, I murmured, as the sound of waves breaking on the beach filled the air. Are you sure? She lowered her sight. This was not like my daughter, not the daughter I knew. I placed my hand on her right arm, drawing her attention to me. Yes, absolutely, I am sure. Amber recognized the gravity of my words as she stared into my eyes. At the end of her story, I wanted to slay the witch, but I couldn't. Right then, so I hugged my kid as close as I could while she screamed against my chest. She couldn't accept responsibility for her own terrible deeds, which wrecked our marriage, so she blamed our children. She wrangled children into her strategy to persuade me to stay with her. If that wasn't bad enough, she tried to get her to entertain one of her male friends she had on the side while married to that jerk. I pondered why my parents hadn't told me this, unless they didn't know. I knew my father would have gone crazy, and my mother would have whacked her with a rolling pin. I'm very sorry, baby, I whispered in her hair. I am sorry about it. No, Dad, you were injured. You had every right to believe we did not want you. I do not blame you. You're here now, that is what matters. I knew one thing, my kids were not going to deal with that woman again, not if I had anything to say about it. Is everything okay? Catalina huffed when Amber hugged her. Suddenly, her eyes met mine, and I knew she was trembling just as much as I was. I believe Catalina understood something had occurred to their mother that caused Amber to take such an interest in her, not that she ever mentioned it to me, well, not at that time. Sure, it'll be fine, Catalina said in her motherly voice as she consoled Amber. Come on, let's get you cleaned up and something to ease your worries, she added, guiding Amber inside the house while giving me that look. She wanted to know everything. I was venting my frustration by beating an old 2x4 against a post, so I didn't vent it on anyone else, given that I am currently unable to grasp Nick, so beating the crap out of that post would have to suffice. I assume Amber informed you. David's voice filled the air as my chest heaved from my excursion of pounding the daylights out of that pole. Yeah, I replied, tossing the plank into the sand. I want you to know that I would never treat Amber like that, David spoke as he walked down the steps to the shore. You better not, I quipped. I don't think my wife would enjoy visiting me in prison. David smiled and remarked, duly noted. She's not helping to pay for the wedding, is she? I inquired, gazing over at David as he joined my side. God, no, she thinks we are making a mistake by getting married. She wants Amber to be single so that she can entice men in, he spat in wrath. I grew to like him. Good, if you need assistance, please contact us, and we will assist you in any way we can, I replied strongly. Do you really mean that? David inquired with a puzzled expression. I nodded. I know how much a wedding costs, since I went through it myself, I said, making a self-deprecating joke. I understand that venues and other expenses are costly, and I understand how difficult it is to begin your adult life when you are still setting the groundwork, so I understand that money might be tight for you and Amber as you plan this all out. If we could help, please do not hesitate to call us. We'll set something up, I replied in a fatherly tone, as I turned to the man and extended my hand to him. I will, you've got my word, Tony, David said, with a hard handshake. Did your father teach you the handshake? I asked, seeing him nod. Good, a father should teach this to his son. What are you two doing out here? Catalina asked from the top of the stairs. Do you know about gay things? I replied, beaming up at her. I did not need to see it, I knew there would be an eye rolled at that. Well, it is getting late, Catalina suggested. That you two come in for the night. However, I could tell from the way she stood that she wanted to talk, saying good night to David before he headed back up the stairs, hearing him say the same thing to Catalina as he passed her. Catalina knew me well enough to know while I may not show it on the outside, I was furious with my ex-wife. Sure, more this rage is bad for you. She's no longer under her mother's thumb, Catalina said softly, running her hands up my chest. She told you to do this? Catalina just nodded. I don't blame you for leaving that woman, although I wish you had brought the kids with you. Then I could become a mother of 3, Catalina teased. 3 people, but not 4, I amusedly twitched my brows. I do not know. Do you think you have what it takes to knock me up again? Catalina asked in a demanding tone. You're serious, right? I stated strongly. Then I should stop taking my medicines, Catalina spoke with a seductive smile. The next 3 days were a blur of joy as we drove Amber and David around the island. We ate some delicious fish, and I met several extremely nice folks. However, I had to hold Catalina back when a person Amber's age approached and accused me of racism and other things. Things I did not take seriously. Who would want to pierce the nose of someone with multicolored hair? A whack job approaches you and screams, "We're stealing Latinx culture." I knew if the kid came to my corporate office searching for work, she wouldn't get through the door. Her appearance was not professional, and in my area of business, one must appear professional. Otherwise, no one will trust you with their money. I don't think the woman noticed the punch coming until it was too late, and the woman on her ass is staring confusedly at Catalina as she speaks Spanish. I will not get into what she said, let's just say I learned a lot more curse words that day than I did on Alandra's visits to her grandparents. I was grateful that David had the wherewithal to cover ALR for years. Maybe next time you shouldn't cast people you don't know and get in their faces over things you don't understand. Then you wouldn't be on your bony bum if you couldn't grasp what my wife said to you. Now I recommend a new dye job and a fresh perspective on life if you want to succeed in this world, I mentioned before leading my family away. It made me wonder what the world would be like if there were more people like that going about. I just hope I'm already dead by then. Even that minor blip on our radar couldn't ruin our experience there, but it was too soon to leave. After washing the bedding and putting them back into the closet, Roberto never wanted sheets on his mattresses. I knew the house would be in use for a while because the family did not arrive until 2 weeks before the start of the new school year. The kids would have something exciting to look back on when they started a new class with all fresh faces. Amber and David helped keep the house as nice as we found it. I locked up the house, knowing we wouldn't be back in Charlotte until late that night. Thank you, Dad. Amber hugged me as we entered my unit, saying, the beach was just perfect. You're welcome, honey, I replied, patting her back. It may have taken a while, but I honor my promises, Catalina muttered. I'm going to put the laundry to bed before kissing my right cheek and bringing our napping daughter to her room. Amber and David soon followed suit, retiring for the night like I was ready to do as I took Catalina's bag into our bedroom. The instant she moved that body next to mine as I turned out the light, everything appeared to be in order. The monthly family gathering was a hoot. Amber and David were met with welcoming arms. Catalina's mother and father were very interested in Amber. It wasn't particularly surprising. After all, Amber was their step-grandchild, and they were a very family-oriented child. I kept my ears open for any comments concerning the two of them. I know Catalina did the same. I even observed her confront one of the kids after he said something vulgar about my daughter. If I had heard it, it would not have been merely a tongue-lashing. The boy was 18. If he could say so, he could withstand the thrashing that followed, and the boy knew it as well. However, I had to intervene and save David before he burned his tongue to a cinder when preparing to consume chili. I knew it had ghost peppers. David might enjoy the heat, but he wasn't suicidal, prompting a round of good-natured chuckles from the others before they offered him a cup of chili with the heat he could manage. Like all wonderful things, it came to an end far sooner than I had hoped. I hadn't spoken to my boy in a week since he was doing some form of training that he couldn't tell me about. I hoped Carson was doing well with whatever the army had him doing. Amber hugged Catalina tightly as we said our goodbyes at the airport, as if she was going to miss her stepmother terribly. However, Catalina was most likely Amber's only motherly figure in 7 years, aside from her grandmother. I saw Alandra hold back tears while my two children hugged for an equal amount of time. "You two have a safe flight. Call us as soon as you land," I said, while bringing David into a one-arm embrace, which astonished him. "What shall I say?" The man grew on me. "We will," David responded, with Amber nodding along. "Do not forget what I told you. If you need assistance with the wedding, we're only a phone call away." Catalina nodded as I stated. "Does this mean you'll accompany me down the aisle?" Amber asked, with hope in her eyes. "I would not miss it," I remarked with a fatherly smile, prompting my daughter to hug me tightly. "And you can call whenever you need to discuss. I'm always willing to listen," Catalina remarked in a motherly, sympathetic tone. "I will." "Thank you," Amber whispered as she clutched Catalina again. "There's no need for thanks. I am your stepmother. I want you to feel comfortable talking to me about anything that is bothering you, and I know Alandra will want to talk to her older sister." I saw Catalina rock Amber just as she would with Alandra when she knew she was upset about anything. Picking up Aura and waving goodbye to her sister over the mass of bodies, I struggled to hold back tears as my daughter's form vanished among that bunch. Nonetheless, I knew we were finally chatting again, making up for lost time. In my grief, I stupidly assumed that there would always be another time. There would be nothing anyone could do to prevent me from seeing my daughter. The months passed, and my children's friendship grew stronger with each passing day. Amber and I spoke practically daily. David even called for banking advice, which I was happy to provide. Carson called as frequently as he could when he wasn't on duty or training elsewhere. I knew that they chatted a lot with Catalina, which pleased her to death. I knew the wedding planning was stressful for Amber, and I knew Catalina had to calm her down a few times. When summer ended, Alandra began kindergarten. I was both proud and grieved that my little girl was growing up so quickly. Catalina remained on birth control, explaining that she did not want to be pregnant when it was time to fly out for their wedding, which I understood by then. I knew she and Amber had built a strong bond, which she didn't have with her mother. If I am honest, that was a blessing. I knew it irritated the witch. As Thanksgiving arrived, I realized Carson would be unable to fly back to Kansas City, which grieved me even more. He agreed to fly to Charlotte around Christmas. He intended to preserve enough leave time to attend Amber's wedding before he was discharged that summer. Not to criticize anyone in the military, I was relieved to hear that. I am not denigrating anyone who takes the oath. I would never do that. That would be dishonorable, and I like to consider myself an honorable man. It's simply that certain nights, while Carson was off training for whatever reason, I lay in my bed worrying about my son's safety. I believe many servicemen realize this because they have children in whatever branch they join. Hey, Mom, I said into my phone as we went through the airport to catch our trip to Kansas City to join my parents, David, Amber, and his folks for Thanksgiving. No, we have not boarded yet. The flight does not leave for another 2 hours. I was phoning to let you know that we are at the airport and should be on our way soon. I'm handing Aura my phone. She was very thrilled to speak with her granny. They try to get out as often as possible to see us, not that they would ever need to purchase an airline ticket. I handled it. They just didn't travel much for their age. As we waited for our aircraft, I noticed Alandra texting like mad to Amber, telling her everything she needed to know from her wide knowledge as a 5-year-old. Amber seemed to be playing along. Then I heard the text alert that I had set for Carson should he have spare time to text us. My daughter appeared to be chatting away with both of them, content as a clam. I rose from my seat and took my phone from Aura as our airplane prepared to board. Mom and Dad, I noticed how Catalina's cheeks flushed when Amber and David arrived to transport us to my parents' house. I know she and Amber hugged for such a long period. I never interrupted when she and Amber were talking. I could tell by the look on Catalina's face that Amber needed someone to talk to who wasn't attempting to manipulate her. I know Alandra. I appreciate David's praise. After all, he was about to become her brother-in-law. David agreed to it, and I extended my hand to him, which he accepted, and then drew me into that masculine one-arm hug. Are these all the bags you have? They inquired, and I nodded in response. Amber pointed the car in this direction, clutching a laundry bag, which she was delighted to do. After all, Alandra hadn't seen her big sister in quite some time. Wait, isn't that Mom's car? I asked as I mentioned the Buick. Yes, they've been allowing us to utilize it since ours has been giving us trouble lately, Amber expressed, embarrassment darkening her face.